Hello, my name is Ken Starr, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Dan and Virginia for the offer to participate in this talk. My name is Dr. Ken Starr, and I am an addiction medicine physician in California in Arroyo Grande, which is on the California Central Coast. My introduction to NAD, just for reference, is I was doing drug and alcohol treatment here for a while. I had a patient who said they were gonna go do this brain restoration therapy, and I didn't know anything about it. They disappeared. I saw them a month or two later. They came back and said how great they felt, and they were off everything. And to make a long story short, I was like, what is this? What is it called? Where'd you go? Never heard of it. I made contact with Dr. Medier, went to Louisiana, trained, brought NAD to California, and started our program around 2014, and that was my introduction to NAD, and it's really quite revolutionary. So real quick, so this is my clinic. This picture is of my clinic here on the left. That's our building in Arroyo Grande, and on the right is me after a long day of taking care of people with drug and alcohol problems. Just kidding. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to give you a little overview about NAD. I'm sure the other lecturers will talk about NAD. I just want to focus on really NAD and addiction medicine and how NAD applies to substance abuse treatment, because that's really what I'm passionate about. Although probably more than half of our patients who do NAD are not coming in for a substance abuse indication. They come in for wellness and longevity. They feel better, to lift their mood and to think more clearly, to live longer, right? I mean, all these things that you guys know about. So that's probably the vast majority of our patients. But nevertheless, we do have really intensive, longer programs for substance abuse indications. Okay, so just some basics. So what is NAD? It's a phosphate group and on nicotinamide chain and adenine. So a phosphate group plus a nucleoside is a nucleotide, right? So these nucleotides serve to carry packets of energy within the cell in the forms of ATP, and they play a central role in metabolism and cell signaling, and they're incorporated into very important cofactors of enzyme reactions, right? Like NADP and NAD, NAD is used for, now we know over the last 30 years, it's used for over 400 metabolic processes: ATP production, PARPs and DNA repair, gene expression, cell signaling, neurotransmitter function, enzyme activities, and of course aging. So the telomere protection is tankerase, which is a PARP type enzyme, and the overexpression of that can lead to lengthening. There's two pathways for NAD production. I guess there's a salvage pathway, where NAD is recirculated, right, through nicotinamide and NMN. And then there's a de novo pathway where it's integrated and you create it from with some precursors in your diet. What's interesting about this chart, though, is not just the production of NAD, but is that neuroinflammation can induce depressive symptoms and increase the likelihood of addiction. This chiarine pathway is can play a major role in drug-related conditions. So quinolinic acid on the left is an excitatory NMDA receptor agonist. And it's been shown that if you treat with NMDA receptor antagonists, for example, ketamine, you can attenuate drug cue associations and reduce cue-induced drug-seeking behavior. What does that mean? That means that, say somebody smokes cigarettes, and every time they smoke, they drink. They only drink when they smoke. That's a cue association. So if you can reduce this excitatory NMDA pathway, you can cool that down. The other thing to know about this is that as the levels of as the levels of inflammation go up, I'll show you this. So NAD must come from dietary sources through to break down these enzymes. This is an inflammatory pathway, tryptophan to quinolinic acid. So if you have lots of NAD, you have less inflammation and pushes the pathway towards a more calm serotonin and melatonin system. NAD is involved in sleep. I forgot to tell you. All right, so what depletes NAD, right? NAD is depleted in several conditions we're going to go over. And you probably already know this. This is a review, But as you get older, oxidative damage increases, and it's measurable, and your NAD levels decline, right? So if we look at mouse NAD levels in different tissues as they get older, they decline in all the organ function, in all the organs, right? And SIRT1 activity, so SIRTs, just to refresh your knowledge, so SIRTs are NAD-dependent enzymes that are involved in gene expression. And a lot of these pathways of health and healing and detoxification are SIRT activated. So to activate SIRTs, you need NAD. So SIRT activity decreases as you get older too, and it corresponds to NAD levels. Oxidative damage is measured by isoprostane, increases as you get older. I wouldn't say over 45 is old, but obviously these researchers did think that. And inflammation goes up as you get over 45. Oxidative damage goes up, and your NAD levels obviously go down. So that as oxidative damage and stress and inflammation go up, NAD is trying to fight that battle, and it gets depleted. All right, how do you raise NAD in your body? Well, there's different ways. Orally, you can take precursors like nicotinamide riboside. That's the chromodex product that's been around for a long time. NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, has been popularized by David Sinclair. That's what he takes. I don't think that NMN is the ideal supplement because it inhibits some PARPs and sirtuins that are involved in longevity, and it can increase methyl depleting potential. So I think if you're going to take an oral supplement, and nicotinamide riboside or NR is the way to go. Niacin or nicotinamide, you can take that, but you're going to get flushed, and there's an enzyme, I think it's called NAEMP, that prevents, that's very rate limiting. So you can never really make substantial amounts of NAD by taking niacin. It just, I wish you could, but you can't. You can do intravenous NAD, which is what we do here. We also do sub-Q, obviously. And you can maintain NAD by reducing oxidative damage and inflammation. The other things that have been shown to increase NAD are fasting, exercise, and stretching. Those are the other things you can actually do to increase NAD levels. SIRTs. SIRT stands for Silent Information Regulators of Gene Transcription. They have a lot of different functions, but they work through a process. And the only reason I'm going into this is that we're trying to understand how NAD works in addiction. It's like, okay, NAD helps with addiction, helps with detox, helps with withdrawal. How? Let me first disqualify myself. I am not a molecular biologist. I did get a degree in molecular biology a long time ago, but this is my interpretation of the research and the researchers that have looked at this and have commented on this. But this, I'm going to try to present to you the reasons we think NAD works to help substance abuse patients. Okay, SIRTs activate gene regulation via this process called histone deacetylation. The way to think about that is when you become dependent on, say, alcohol or opiate or a benzo, your body develops a tolerance to that, right? And so you need more and more of that for the same effect. That process that develops tolerance is actually the process of histone acetylation. So histone acetylation is tolerance, and histone deacetylation can be associated with withdrawal. So there's some reason that we think that NAD affects histone deacetylation in the SIRT system. All right, a little bit of the history of NAD. It was first isolated in the 30s. There's documentation that NAD was used since the 30s, and then a paper came out that I'll show you in the 50s that was very impressive. And it's been used quite extensively for alcohol and other chemical dependencies since the 70s. Before I go into that, I want to tell you, I'm going to summarize real quick what we know. I have like three sides. This is called what we know, and here's the main bullet points. NAD is this essential nucleotide that's critical for energy production and cellular protection against stress and longevity. If you have NAD levels are low, like an alcohol or substance abuse patient, they have high levels of oxidative damage and low energy. NAD is a major signaling process associated with the biology of addiction. And it's been shown that raising intracellular NAD levels can target addictive behaviors, reduce withdrawals, and reduce cravings. And this is not subtle. If you're in the detox business or drug and alcohol business, when you detox people with or without NAD, it's really night and day. Experiments have shown that if you can replenish or support cellular NAD levels, people have a lower rate of relapse. And interestingly, the overactivation of the glutaminergic system has been shown to play an important role of substance abuse, getting back to that chiarine pathway. I think that's more of maybe how ketamine can help support it, but NAD is also important in the system. Reduced studies have shown reduced mitochondrial function in these high stress states, depression, anxiety, and stress, which of course are associated with addiction. And the potential benefit can be mediated by increased adenosine levels and activation of adenosine receptors. What that is really short for is that it affects the dopamine system, because there's a relationship between adenosine and dopamine. Okay. NAD consumption's increase in addiction. You lose this energy homeostasis, and it plays a very important physiological role in addiction. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. All right. How do you know? Okay. 1961, O'Halloran reports, and he's at the Shiksadel Hospital. I'm going to tell you a story about that. That's pretty funny. So he took some patients, and I'll show you the results, but he came to this conclusion that patients, these substance abuse patients, had complete, immediate, permanent withdrawal of all addictive drugs has been achieved to date in this group of patients by this treatment. Right? And here's his conclusions from this paper. 104 cases of addiction. They gave NAD, which they call diphosphopyridine nucleotide, same thing. And over this week, I don't remember what the protocol was they used, but he noticed whether it was phenobarbital, barbiturates, tranquilizers, alcohol, amphetamines. All these patients had complete, immediate, total, and permanent withdrawal was achieved and maintained by proper administration and dosage of the medication. Withdrawal is achieved with very few of the characteristic withdrawal symptoms usually experienced, and for a number of substances, as I mentioned, and craving for the addictive drug was completely removed. This is a pretty bold statement. This is a bold statement, but once you start using NAD in addiction, it's pretty amazing. So anyway, this paper came out from this Shadell Hospital. So I did some research a few years ago, and I called. So I'm like, where's this Shadell Hospital? It's actually in Washington. I called up there out of curiosity, and I was like, hey, do you guys still use NAD? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, do you have a doctor there? So they connected me to this doctor. His name is Repass. And I sent them this paper. I said, look, you guys did the initial work with NAD and published the study. And I ended up sending to this guy, and he was fascinated. His name is Richard Repass. He subsequently went to Louisiana, trained with Mediaid, and started an NAD program in Washington. And I think his program's called like Revolution Recovery. So that's a pretty funny. But if you guys remember the Shadell commercials, I don't know if we have sound. Let me see if this will play. That's pretty funny. It turns out that they don't use NAD, the Shadell, they use something called aversion therapy, which is where they gave you like Ipecac or something that made you puke up your booze until you lost the aversion, until you created an aversion to it. Okay, so what's a little bit of the background on NAD? So here's the background of NAD as I understand it, and as told to me by the interesting group of people that are involved in its origin. Dr. Hitt is in Tijuana, Mexico. and he's got a clinic that offers neurotransmitter replacement therapy, NTR. Patients came from all over the world to his Tijuana clinic to cure their addiction. Dr. Medier, Richard Medier, and his wife Paula had a teenage daughter in Louisiana who had gotten into substance addiction. Richard was a retired psychiatrist. Paula was a counselor and social worker. And they ended up taking their daughter to Tijuana to do this treatment, which was very effective. They were so intrigued by it, they ended up staying there and actually moved there and lived there and worked in this clinic, giving people what they described as just neurotransmitter replacement therapy and seeing these great results. It was after that Hit died, Medier and Paula bring a vial of this NTR back to Louisiana to have it analyzed in a lab, legitimate, gas chromatography. They find out, again, this is the stories I heard, but they found out that it was just pure NAD. And that's when Medier started developing protocols over the last 10 years about these doses and what kind of doses and how much you give them and how many days you need to do this treatment. He created a system, branded it, and he calls it brain restoration therapy. Now, brain restoration therapy is a particular protocol using NAD along with some other supplements, but you might see that. And that's just Springfield Wellness Group's proprietary program. It's actually a small group of doctors. We all kind of are involved in this, but I think a lot of people doing, most people doing NAD probably don't even know what that is. All right, a little bit of more science. Researchers, this guy Ross Grant, you'll see his name, he's a big NAD researcher in Australia. He's proved that NAD levels are decreased in alcoholics. Older folks have lower NAD levels. Alcohol directly increases NAD, and the more measurable amounts of neuroinflammation and oxidative stress that can be measured, it's associated with lower NAD levels as well. Well, why is NAD lower in alcohol patients? Let me show you a simple slide. You'll see here alcohol on the left. One molecule of alcohol goes to acetaldehyde. That takes a molecule of NAD for that catabolism. Acetaldehyde gets converted to acetate before you pee it out. That's another molecule of NAD. Every molecule of alcohol requires 2 molecules of NAD to be metabolized. Every molecule. So if you're exposing yourself to alcohol all the time, you're burning up all your NAD. If you're using all this NAD to metabolize alcohol, you're not using it to support your immune system, for anti-aging, for cellular strength, for DNA repair, to handle oxidative stress, to maintain the energy hemostasis of your mitochondria. Here's a real obvious example. Go look at somebody who's been a heavy drinker, right? You know they are. They all look like 30 years older than they really are, right? The skin, the appearance, and all that really is a substantial NAD deficiency, I think, at the core level. Here's what I can tell you. If you give people NAD, it alleviates alcohol withdrawal. We have alcohol patients detoxing in the clinic. We're just giving them NAD. NAD reduces cravings by modulating this neuroadaptive response, and it reduces negative reinforcement, which is the same thing as altering the stress circuit. What's negative reinforcement? Negative reinforcement is this. When you first start drinking, say like or using a drug, say I drink, and then I feel good. I feel relaxed, I feel happy, I feel social. That's positive reinforcement. And I drink and feel good. I get a positive response. If I continue that behavior, I drink, I feel good, I drink, now every day I drink, I feel good. You get to a tipping point where now you're drinking so you don't feel bad. Now you're not drinking to feel good, to feel pleasure, to be relaxed. Now you're not drinking, or now you're drinking just so you don't feel sick, right? Or you don't get shaky, or you don't get anxious. That's negative reinforcement. That's a rewiring of the stress circuit that seems to be this sort of kindling or sensitization seems to be highly NAD dependent. Going back, so yeah, CERT1 activity is NAD dependent. And here's the thing here though, CERT activity is increased in response to stress, fasting, exercise, and low glucose. So this in turn increases intracellular NAD levels. If your NAD levels are low, SERT activity is low. If SERT activity is low, you can't turn off the genes that drive aging, and you can't maintain healthy NAD levels. Kind of catch-22, right? In chronic alcohol abuse, the histone proteins for genes become acetylated. This is what I was talking about, this process of histone acetylation and histone deacetylation. That's the molecular biology of tolerance. SERT deacetylates histones, NAD reverses the epigenetic mechanism for alcohol. So if you really want to impress your friends, say, yeah, I mean, NAD works by histone deacetylation, and that's why we use it for drug and alcohol treatment. Oh, okay. Anyway, it's probably this deacetylase function of the SERTs that reduces drug cravings and recidivism. Another thought is that this is kind of different, but when you drink alcohol, that aldehyde component binds with dopamine at the opiate receptor in the brain. And that is partially responsible for making you feel good, which is why we use naltrexone, which is an opiate blocker, to decrease cravings and to reduce the reward and reinforcing effects of alcohol. So our alcohol patients, a lot of times we'll put them on naltrexone, which is an opiate receptor blocker, because the aldehyde dopamine binding, NAD seems to replace that. It kind of stimulates it and replaces it, and we think that may prevent withdrawal. It also binds, and it binds at the receptor site, right? And that relieves the opiate withdrawal. Maybe a role of why it relieves opiate withdrawal. I can have opiate patients on an NAD infusion with very, very little withdrawal symptoms, which is pretty amazing. This is just the same slide, a picture I found that basically showing that how histone deacetylase silences this reward mechanism. Okay, moving forward. Okay, let's talk about drinkers. If you have more than one standard drink a day, you have measurably less alcohol in your CSF. Again, showed by Ross Grant and his group in Australia. Of course, one drink's not too much, so maybe I shouldn't have one drink. That's associated with inflammation, right? If you drink more than one standard drink a day too, you have higher levels of measurable inflammation. The inflammation also can be in your liver. So NAD is an essential coenzyme of mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation and energy metabolism, right? And if you give nicotinamide riboside, which is that oral precursor we talked about that gets converted to NMN, it gets converted to NAD, that actually has been shown to reverse alcohol-induced fatty liver. And more interestingly is that there were some studies done where they knocked out they genetically modified this SERT enzyme that's involved in oxidative phosphorylation, I guess. They knocked out the SERT1 that's involved in fatty droplet deposition, right? Fatty liver disease. If you overexpress this SERT enzyme, in other words, if you have NAD and it activates the SERT enzyme, it prevents lipid deposition. If you're NAD deficient, by knocking out this SERT1 gene, you get fatty liver disease. So these guys basically showed that that nicotinamide riboside, a precursor to NAD, that makes NAD that activates SERTs, is really protective against alcohol-induced liver injuries. Now, don't go out and take NAD and go drink. That's not what I'm saying. But if you were to go out and drink, you probably should take NAD or nicotinamide riboside first. But so if you have patients with alcoholic fatty liver disease, they are NAD deficient. All right, let's talk about opiates now. So we know opiates reduce cravings and withdrawal. We see that all the time. There's some evidence, as I mentioned, it binds directly to the opiate receptor. Maybe that was one of the ways it modulates its response. But it's a similar system because it activates this SERT1 in the reward center in the nucleus accumbens, NA's nucleus accumbens. I don't want to bore you, but it's the same thing. Drug-induced expression of these transcription factors, which enhances the reward effect. And NAD therapy reverses this reward effect on the epigenetic level. Epigenetic is how the environment evolves on it interacts with your genes. It's this histone deacetylation function that silences the reward mechanism, both short-term and long-term. So by that, I mean is like when you give NAD to alcoholics, sometimes not only does it alleviate withdrawal and craving, a lot of these people have long-term eraser effects, like they have no cravings for alcohol, like they were never exposed to it. Isoprostane's a measure of inflammation that's used. If you are healthy, you have low levels of this. If you drink or have opiate or alcohol abuse, you have high levels of neuroinflammation. If you give NAD to these patients, this was a study presented at the National Association of Neuroscience that was done by Ross Grant, the Australian researcher, and Mediate, that you have decreased levels of measurable neuroinflammation by giving NAD. What did they do exactly? Well, they gave 750 milligrams of NAD over 6 hours for 5 days. That was their protocol, which is not too dissimilar than how we use it, actually, about 750 milligrams. Or they gave saline, and they put it on the pump, and then they measured the plasma levels. Basically, what they found is that plasma levels of all the NAD and the derivatives of it, like NMN, all increased with time. They all go up. And their observations are that if you give NAD, you increase your levels by over 400%. Well, that makes sense. You're giving it. It seems like you should be able to measure it and it would go up. It actually got into red blood cell. And the rise in NAD throughout the infusion was parallel by rise in alpha-proteins. Inflammation goes down. Sorry, just this repeat. In 10 subjects, neuroinflammation as measured by 8-isoprostane goes down if you give NAD. This is what's called a, this is the scale. This is the scale that they developed as a survey that patients take throughout the NAD 10-day infusion, where we'll ask them on day 0, on day 1. This is the day 1 rotation, or you can just write the date. We usually do this day 0, day 3, day 5, day 7, day 10. And it's just self-reported, like how did you sleep? How's your appetite? How's your clarity? And with this, how's your cravings? And with this, we were able to measure treatments at our clinic. This is our data. After 1 treatment, patients' withdrawal symptoms decreased by 97% on the CWA scale, which is the alcohol withdrawal scale. It's called the CWA scale. And it decreased by 84% in patients on the opiate withdrawal scale after 1 day. After 1 treatment, patients self-reported better mood, with less withdrawal, 80% less withdrawal, and 89% had reduced cravings. This is going back to Mediate's data that was presented. This is interesting. Let me explain this. This is a slide that measured cravings. And what they did is they took these patients who were on stimulants, opiates, alcohol, or other drugs. They measured cravings at day 1 and cravings at day 10 after NAD. The reason this is interesting is that all of these patients had significantly reduced cravings at day 10. Well, what do you normally see in 10 days of an opiate treatment program? You see very high cravings for alcohol and opiates in a traditional drug and alcohol recovery program, not less cravings. Also, they measured, and this is self-reported data, but they measured lower rates of relapse in patients who did NAD at a year and at almost 2 years. It was the same thing. They reduced cravings at day 1, day 5, and day 10. Patients had much lower cravings after 10 days of NAD. The way I think about this, and is the way I understand it, is like it seems like when you give NAD for addiction, those first 7 days, it really is alleviating withdrawal and reducing symptoms of detox, whether it's benzos or alcohol or opiates. It seems like the second part is more of a restoration, like people turn the corner, they're starting to sleep better, they're starting to feel better, and then we try to get a few more days, and that's almost like the restorative phase. Longer acting opiates and longer acting benzos need longer treatments, as you would imagine. I didn't really talk much about the protocols. I mean, I can help you guys with that. We will typically, so what does a protocol look like? I'll typically start like either 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams a day. I started, we used to start with 1,500 milligrams a day. I rarely do that now because most patients can't get through that much, and it's a waste of money because you have to pay for the NAD, which is expensive. So I usually start my patients on 1,000 milligrams. If it looks like they're going to get through it, I might add 500. So we'll do 1,000 milligrams a day for the first couple days. I'll drop them to like 750 for a couple days. I'll run them out at about 500 milligrams a day for most of the time, and then bring it back up at a higher dose. Now, that's if someone's doing a whole 10-day program. If they're doing a shorter program, like lots of people aren't going to do 10 days, they'll commit to 3 or 5 days. I'm just giving them 1,000 milligrams a day. If they can't get through that, then that will declare itself, and I'll drop the dose. And of course, this will need to be in different amounts of fluid. Just for reference, 500 milligrams or less, I think, can go in a 500 cc bag. Anything more than 500 milligrams, I put in a liter bag. And I have good luck with that. And I don't use an infusion pump for this. I just use the patient controlled. I have a nurse and the patient, they kind of control it. We just make sure it goes as slow as possible, so they don't have any of the characteristic symptoms of, like, the ice cream headache over their whole body and chest pain and all these other classic symptoms of NAD going in too fast. I'm going to end here. I just wanted, hopefully I just gave you a little information on how we use NAD in addiction. I would throw out that if you are not running a drug and alcohol program, if you're running a general infusion clinic wellness practice, I wouldn't take on addiction patients. I think that because we're still using counseling and a lot of other PRN meds for sedation and sleep and so forth. And also, you probably don't want patients in your clinic all day, every day for 10 days feeling sick and having diarrhea and throwing up. So if you're not doing NAD for addiction, I wouldn't start for addiction, but just know that a lot of patients who have not found sobriety and recovery with more traditional methods really have a great response to NAD, and it's something we're trying. And so you either could try to take somebody on if you're up for it, or maybe refer them to a clinic that really does NAD specifically for addiction. I know that most of the NAD clinics that I know of don't want these types of patients, but they're happy to do a couple of days of NAD. Or what you could do is somebody just had post-acute withdrawal, they've been sober for a month or two, and they want to try NAD. That would be a perfect person to try to get maybe 3 to 5 grams in them over 3 to 5 days. I just want to finish with a couple testimonials that I thought were interesting. That's a guy that came to us from the Northeast. I have one more. So that's all I have. Thanks for your attention. Virginia, or in the handout, it'll show how to get a hold of me. You can email me if you have questions, or come by the clinic and see what we do. We're happy to have you guys. And I think I'm going to try to be available at the end of the day for you guys to answer questions you have. Thanks for your time.